Hello and welcome to the Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. Each week, the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in finance take you beyond the numbers and hype, right to the heart of the big issues of the day. This week, we're looking to France. Now, this past week, President Emmanuel Macron has named Sébastien Lecornu, Defence Minister in the outgoing government, as the new Prime Minister. He'll be the fifth Premier in less than 2 years, after his last two predecessors lost the support of the National Assembly over efforts to curb national borrowing. Macron says Lecornu needs to consult the political forces in Parliament with a view to adopting a budget. The news came just a day after François Bayrou was defeated in a vote of confidence, having proposed measures aimed at narrowing France's 2026 deficit to 4.6% of GDP from an expected 5.4% this year. Lecornu is an experienced minister, having served in the government since Macron was elected back in 2017. Now, all of this happened against the further backdrop of so-called block everything protests happening around the country. In a moment, we're going to hear from Claudia Panseri, the CIO for UBS Wealth Management France. But just before that, a word from one of Monocle's regular chroniclers of French politics and economics. On our Globalist show on Thursday, we spoke to Florence Biederman, journalist and political analyst and former AFP chief editor. Our Georgina Godwin began by asking Florence about the ongoing protests and their scale.
Well, they don't seem to be ongoing, and let's say on a French scale, they were not that impressive. As you know, French have a tradition to protest and demonstrate. The point is that there was officially some 200,000 demonstrators. There were demonstrations and attempt to block the country in several big cities, but the police forces intervened pretty quickly. Like, they were perfectly aware of what was going on. And so the country was not blocked, and it has not been like the pandemonium or the big blockade you could fear. The problem is that there may be other actions coming. The problem for the government is, of course, the day the Prime Minister is sworn, it's not a good omen to start under this situation. And the trade unions have also called for a day of protest on the 18th of September, which means very soon. And this will probably be much bigger, and you can feel, in any case, there is this social unrest and a deep social dissatisfaction in the country over the political situation and over the situation as a whole.
What does Lecornu bring to the job that his predecessors did not?
That's a very good question. What he brings, what he's supposed to bring. And by the way, you have to mention that it was Macron's choice for the last time when he appointed François Bayrou. Bayrou was not his first choice. He wanted already to appoint Sébastien Lecornu. That means Macron really bets on him. He's a close advisor of him. He has been ministers in all his governments for 7 years in a row, which is kind of an incredible challenge. And he expects, I guess, he's presented as somebody who can talk with many people, who can even talk to the far right. By the way, he was criticized for this because he had a meeting with Marine Le Pen that was kind of secret at the time. He is supposed to be a moderate. He's supposed to be a man of dialogue. But, somehow you heard this already. That was already said, like, for François Bayrou, his predecessor, for Michel Barnier, his predecessor. So there is a lot of skepticism on what he can achieve, because whatever his skills are, the situation will be the same in the National Assembly, with three antagonist groups that obviously cannot really make alliance. At least they've been trying for months and he didn't succeed. So what will he bring? Well, he has, let's say, a daunting task, and there is a lot of skepticism on the fact that he succeeds.
What can he possibly do to reassure nervous investors and steady the economy? This is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. He will have, obviously, his predecessors failed because there was a lack of dialogue with hhis own centrist group and with the opposition. So what he can do is at least manage to have the budget, the 2026 budget, adopted, because this was one of the reasons the Bayrou government fell, because people were protesting against this austerity budget. France has this amazing public debt that it has to rein in. So this was an austerity budget that was refused. So The first thing Lecornu should do is talk to everyone. Already he convoked this morning, like all the heads of his centrist bloc, let's say, or alliance, to talk with them. And surprisingly, this is not what his predecessor did. So will all this dialogue, all this negotiation at least manage to, stabilize the budget and to stabilize the situation? This remains to be seen, but this is definitely the hope for, the French people too.
And Florence, finally, what does this tell us about France's trajectory as it edges towards the 2027 presidential race? Will Macron last that long?
That's his hope. And in any case, it's more than a hope because he said he would never resign. And I think you can be living on this. And this succession of governments, supposing Lecornu lasts only a few months, then you can be sure he will appoint another prime minister. His goal, in any case, is to hang on till this next presidential election. So the trajectory is not good. When you think about it, you can see this as a political crisis. You see no solution to it. And the worry is that, even the presidential election, whether it will bring, any kind of people meeting together and deciding to work together under a new president, this is also something that is not sure at all. So definitely it's rather more interrogation on the capacity of France to stabilize itself. And that's very worrying, yeah. Politically, it's really worrying.
Florence Biedermann talking to Monocle's Georgina Godwin earlier. Well, next up, let's hear, as promised, from Claudia Panseri, the CIO for UBS Wealth Management France. Claudia, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us. Now, we've been hearing there about how the week unfolded. Give us your take on another pretty turbulent few days in French politics. What did you make of it?
The situation is that the current election system will not allow the small party to have more votes, like is the case in Italy. So as long as we don't have a majority able to pass, let's say, reform, reducing the deficit, rethinking about the trajectory of the debt, the situation will come again and again. We have seen last year, we had the dissolution, we had the 3 blocks, and since then, we having different PM trying to pass the budget. Every time the budget need a vote of confidence, we don't get majority, and then we need the change of PM again. So when I think about the situation of even looking to the survey, even if we go into a new election, the global scenario remains the same. So we still see 3 blocks, the major one with the Rassemblement National, so the right, but not having majority, so still have slightly more than 30%. And then you have a second block, which is made by the left, which is also around 20% if we take into account extreme left and then, let's say, the moderate part of the left. And then you have a center, so all the parties around Macron. And so you still get out with a National Assembly, which is break in 3 parts. And every time you need to pass something, then you don't have a support. And this is coming again and again. In my best scenario, this will continue until 2027. In 2027, it's not sure that we will get the majority. But when we look into the survey for having general election plus presidential election, then we see that something is changed. Today, we have Bardella having more than 30% of his support. Then you have Marine Le Pen having something 27% support. So you see that there is a willing to change at the presidential election. So we may end up with a situation where until 2027, we have instability, incapacity to bring the deficit down in material way, but also always seeing this sort of coming back with a new PM, and then every time you need a vote, it doesn't have a support. And that's probably the situation many people are already thinking about. And we see in the pricing of the bond market, which is already on the short term of the yield curve, is trading in line with Italy, which has a credit rating which is below the French one.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that in a second. So, look, you've effectively answered this question, Claudia, already. But I guess to be explicit then, do you think that Lecornu can secure enough support to pass a budget? It sounds like possibly not. And it's really, we need to wait to 27 to see meaningful movement here. Is that a fair kind of summation?
My understanding is already mentioned that is happy to make some agreement with a moderate part of the left. Is not looking to the right, is just trying probably to get back to the pension reform. This is very important because that was a point of disagreement between Beirut and the Socialist Party. Lecornu is reopening the door for a discussion around the pension reform. So that could be a point of agreement. And then in that case, the Socialist Party may probably give up some of the rising tax on the rich part of the country. It seems to me that it will name part of the government with people which are coming from the left. It was already the case with Beirut, but this time probably he want to give more important position. Let's see. My feeling is also that he need to negotiate more. He can't just reduce spending by 44 billion because he had Beirut was not able. If you remember, Barnier last year, he was proposing 60 billion of reduction. Then Beirut was proposing 44 billion. My assumption is Lecornu will try to do something which is good enough for European Commission. I gave between 20 and 25 billion, which is about 0.5% of the GDP in France. And that will be in line with European Commission rules because, France is part of the deficit excessive procedure. And that will be a mix between probably freezing spending and rising a bit of taxes. I'm not sure what we are able to do on the pension reform. We can't get back to 62 years. That is clear. You already know that France is one of the countries with the biggest government spending, 56% versus to GDP. So I think a compromise needs to be found. The difference between Beirut and Lecornu is that Lecornu is already opening the door since the beginning. So he's already opening the discussion, saying we can rediscuss the pension reform. And that is very important.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I suppose it flies in the face in certain respects of his track record. He was part of the president's last re-election campaign. And I think I'm right in saying he's the only minister to have served in all 8 years under Macron so far. And yet you're suggesting that he perhaps does have the scope or the capacity to move sufficiently to drive some progress, which is interesting. I wanted to ask you, Claudia, about the degree to which the market has priced in. You were talking about very high spending levels, and we've described this political volatility, this uncertainty. To what degree is that already priced into the market? Again, if we look a little bit further forwards, and you talked again about the fiscal deficit, a much higher degree of GDP compared to the EU's limit, for example. But to what extent is that already priced in?
I would say a lot is priced in the short-term part of the yield curve. For instance, if we look all the OAT bonds between 1 and 4 years, they are already trading above. The bonds is already the spread between OAT and bonds on the segment between 2 5 years, 1 5 years are already trading in line with Italy or above Italy's spread, which also means that many investors are already pricing that the credit outlook of France will be revised down, and essentially we will move from AA to single A. This is something we already expect for the coming 12 months. So clearly we have this first element, which is important. On the long term end of the yield curve, this is a bit tricky to answer, because if you end up with a deficit which remain above 5%, for the coming 2, 3, 4 years, let's say just already to 2027, you are adding 3 points of debt every year. So if in 27 we don't have a majority, because that is not sure. We may have a president which is coming from Rassemblement National, but having a parliament which is a different structure, it could happen. Then it's not sure that you are able to ensure political stability. It took to Italy 40 years to get this kind of stability we have today. So it could take to France a lot of time before finding a sort of stability capacity to reduce the deficit. So on the 10 years tenor, I think we may find or we may see a bit of spread widening. There is another element which is important and may drive widening spread in a way which is not fundamentally driven. If the credit rating for France is downgraded, there are plenty of fund managers which can't keep French bonds in the mandate, because there is a rule. You need to look to the 2 out of the 3 rating agency note, and then if there is a downgrade from 2 out of 3, then you need to sell the holding. And if you are in a situation where you have a placement and you don't have buyers, then the spread may widen again. And here, what we have seen so far, there is no concern. People are still buying a lot, all the placement. France is doing a lot of placement, indeed was very active on the last few weeks. But every time the placement was subscribed. So this is also the reason why we haven't seen spread moving above 82, 83 basis points relative to the bond. But if we are in a situation where the placements are not going well, or you don't have much subscriber, life insurance in France can't increase anymore, the holding of sovereign bonds, that could bring the spread at a level which are not consistent with fundamentals. That is a risk.
Yeah, that fixed income picture is super interesting. Claudia, let me just ask you one quick question, sort of leaning back into the politics, the geopolitics. Let's talk a little bit about Macron. We've already mentioned 27 and the various attendant challenges as we build up towards that next big election. And it's interesting, if we think about Macron's recent track record, obviously there was the dissolution of Parliament, which I think backfired fairly spectacularly last year. One of the kind of political narratives is the need for him to sort of do compromise, right, and to lean into that. But, you know, his track record doesn't perhaps suggest that he's best equipped to do it. What's your take on what his role is going to be over that next kind of 18 months, 2 years until the next presidential election?
This is a quite interesting question, because Barnier wasn't very close to Macron. Bayrou wasn't very close to Macron. Lecornu is close to Macron. You mentioned before he has been in Macron government since 2017. So he's someone which is very close. For me, it also means that Macron is trying to find someone which is help to negotiate, but also taking Macron's suggestion about managing this very fragmented parliament. So I think I see this nomination as a sort of, let's say, involvement of Macron into the next step. What I think Macron will not do is just say, okay, we call general election and plus presidential election. I don't see him to do that. And I think as a sense in sense that constitutionally, when you have a parliament which is fragmented, and when you have a survey which are pointing again to fragmented parliament, you know that calling a general election a presidential election doesn't really solve the issue. It just creates more concern for investor. And the French debt is old a lot, by 60% is old by foreigners. So if you end up with a general election and then a presidential election, and you increase concern about the crisis we are facing, then there is a blow up. And I think he doesn't want that. So he's trying in a different way to find a compromise. What is quite surprising is that he's not opening up more to the right. He's rather trying to find an agreement with the left. So he's trying to play what we call the Republican agreement we had in the second round of the general election last year. So he's trying to find the support from the moderate party of the left, once again, to do the minimum necessary to pass the budget and to pass the EDP, so the excess deficit procedure, and be in line with European Commission rule. But Lecornu nomination means to me that there is more implication from Macron now.
Claudia Panseri. That brings us to the end of this edition of the programme here on Monocle Radio. You can listen again and explore more at monocle.com or follow and subscribe wherever you get your audio. And as always, you can discover more and find out how UBS can help you at ubs.com. This is The Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.